She floods you with affection before you've earned her real attention. Gifts you haven't asked for. Guests that arrive before you've had time to miss her. She fills every silence with compliments, every pause with promises, and you mistake intensity for intimacy. You mistake speed for destiny. You think you finally found someone who sees you, but she's not seeing you. She's studying you. And that study began the moment you met. But here's the truth. Love bombing is not affection. It is investment. She is not giving you her heart. She is purchasing your compliance. Every compliment is a deposit to an emotional account she intends to drain later. Every whispered confession of "I've never felt this way before" is not tenderness. It is calculation. She overwhelms you with intensity now so that you accumulate a deficit you must repay when the warmth turns cold and the demands begin. The love she showers you with is the cost of the leash she intends to slip around your frame. You call it romance, she calls it leverage. Real attraction grows in silence and space. It breathes, it waits, it allows you to wonder and question and decide. But artificial attraction screams for attention. It floods your senses specifically to drown out your intuition. It overwhelms your nervous system so you cannot think clearly. If she gives you everything before you've given her anything, she is not in love with you. She is creating a debt, and the interest rate on emotional debt is your entire identity. What follows are the 9 mechanisms she uses to acquire you. Not all at once, not obviously, but in sequence, each one triggering the next, each one making you more dependent on the last. By the time you recognize the pattern, you've already surrendered the ability to see it clearly. But if you can see the mechanics before they're deployed against you, you can inoculate yourself against them. Most men never do. Most men never see the system until they're already inside it. Don't be most men. The first mechanism is neurochemical hijacking. She moves fast because speed is a drug. You meet on Saturday. By Tuesday, she's texting you good morning. By Friday, she's calling you before bed. By the following week, she's told you things she's never told anyone. Your brain cannot process this pace analytically. It can only feel. And what it feels is dopamine flooding every receptor, telling you that this must be real because nothing fake could feel this intense. Here's what's happening in your brain. Dopamine doesn't signal happiness, it signals reward prediction. It tells your nervous system that something valuable is happening, and you need to pay attention. When dopamine floods your system, your brain becomes hyper-focused on the source. Everything else, skepticism, caution, critical thinking gets downregulated. You literally cannot think clearly because your brain has been hijacked by the neurochemistry of reward. She knows this. She's not moving fast because she's excited. She's moving fast because speed is the only way to bypass your defenses before your analytical mind catches up. But intensity is not intimacy. Intensity is a sedative. When your nervous system is overwhelmed with novelty and validation, your prefrontal cortex, the part that evaluates, questions, detects inconsistency, goes quiet. You stop noticing that she hasn't asked you a single deep question about your actual life. You stop noticing that her vulnerability always positions her as the victim and you as the rescuer. You stop noticing that she's moved into your emotional world like she's always lived there, rearranging the furniture before you've decided to let her stay. She declares you her soulmate within weeks. She whispers that she's never connected with anyone like this. She cries when you're apart for a single day. But these are not signs of fate. These are lines from a script. She has rehearsed them before with the last man. She will rehearse them again with the next. The declaration of destiny arrives too fast because it must. Slow connection gives you time to see clearly. Fast connection keeps you blind long enough to sign the contract without reading the terms. And while your brain is flooded with dopamine, unable to think critically, she moves to the next phase. She becomes exactly what you need her to be. The second mechanism is identity theft disguised as compatibility. You mention you love jazz. 3 days later, she's sending you Coltrane tracks and saying she's always loved jazz but never had anyone to share it with. You mention you hate small talk. Suddenly she's telling you how exhausting she finds superficial people. Using the exact language you used, mirroring your frustration like a perfect echo. You mention your father never understood you. She tears up and says her father was the same way. Distant, critical, impossible to please. You're not noticing the precision. You're noticing how perfectly she fits into your world. You're thinking, finally, someone who gets it. Finally, someone who sees beneath the surface, but she doesn't get it. She's getting you. Every preference you reveal becomes a mask she wears. Every value you express becomes a value she adopts. Every wound you share becomes a wound she claims to have also. She is not showing you her soul. She is reflecting yours, so you fall in love with your own image and mistake it for her. This is data collection, not connection. She's cataloging your triggers, your wounds, your desires, not to understand you, but to weaponize them. The things that excite you become bait she can dangle. The things that hurt you become pressure points she can press. She files it all away with the precision of a trader building a position. And you hand it over willingly because it feels like intimacy when someone asks the right questions. It feels like love when someone seems to understand. It doesn't occur to you that the questions themselves are the extraction, that every confession you make is leverage you're voluntarily placing in her hands. And once she has cataloged everything, she moves to the next phase. She sells you a future so specific, so tailored to your desires that you stop evaluating her entirely. The third mechanism is cognitive anchoring through fantasy. She starts talking about the future before she knows your middle name. Not vague future, specific future. She notices you mention a cabin you visited once as a kid. Suddenly, she's researching properties in that exact region, sending you listings, talking about how perfect it would be for the two of you. She hears you say you've always wanted to learn guitar. She buys a used one and suggests you could teach each other. She catches the way you light up when you talk about your nephew. She says she wants 3 kids, no, 4, and she's already imagined their names. She paints these images with such specificity that they embed in your mind like memories of things that haven't happened yet, and the trap is this. The more specific the fantasy, the more it feels like your fantasy. Like she's not selling you a future, she's discovered the future you've always wanted and is offering to build it with you. This is not romantic dreaming, this is strategic anchoring. By making you see a shared future, she shifts your focus from who she is now, which you don't actually know, to who she promises to become. You stop evaluating the present because you're too busy protecting the fantasy. You find yourself defending her to friends who see clearly what you cannot. You make excuses for behavior that would alarm you and anyone else. Because if you question her, you lose the future she sold you, and that future has already become yours. You've already furnished the house in your mind. You've already named the children. Walking away now means grieving a life that felt real even though it never existed. The specificity is the hook that embeds deepest. She doesn't say maybe someday, she says, our kitchen will have that island you wanted, and I already know what I'm naming our daughter. The more detailed the fantasy, the deeper it lodges in your nervous system as something to protect. She creates a we so vivid that you begins to dissolve. Your goals become negotiable because they must serve the shared vision. Your timeline becomes hers because the future requires coordination. Your identity merges with a story that exists only in her words and in the longing those words created inside you. And now that you're emotionally invested in a future that only exists in her narrative, she begins to monopolize the present. She needs you, all of you, every moment. The fourth mechanism is resource monopolization through engineered need. She doesn't demand you leave your friends. That would be too obvious and would trigger your defenses. Instead, she simply needs you. Every night, every weekend, every moment you might have spent elsewhere. She frames her need as passion. She just can't get enough of you. She's never felt this close to anyone. Being apart from you is physically painful, and you feel chosen. You feel irreplaceable. You feel like the center of someone's universe. But watch what happens to your life over the next few months. Your friends become obstacles to the connection. Your hobbies become threats to the intimacy. Your work becomes competition she barely tolerates. You mention plans with a friend and she sighs, just slightly, just enough to register disappointment without stating it. You mention a weekend trip and she grows quiet, then says she just thought you'd want to spend that time with her. She never says stop, she never makes demands. She just makes everything outside the relationship feel like betrayal of something sacred. Here's the precision of it. She never says don't go. She says I wish you didn't have to go. She never forbids your friends. She just grows quiet when you mention them, then brightens when you suggest staying in instead. She never demands you quit your hobby. She just mentions, casually, almost in passing, how much she misses you when you're at the gym, how she feels abandoned, how she thought you wanted to build something together. And because she's never demanded anything, you can't accuse her of controlling you. You're choosing to stay. You're choosing to cancel plans. You're choosing to prioritize her. Except you're not choosing. You're being guided, and the guidance is so soft, so reasonable, so wrapped in the language of love that you mistake it for your own decision. This is soft isolation executed with surgical precision. She becomes your only source of validation, your only supply of emotional regulation, your only mirror for reality. She creates an us against the world mentality. Only she truly understands you. Only she sees your potential. Everyone else is jealous or doesn't get it or wants to come between you. This is not love. It is captivity dressed in silk. She separates you from objective feedback so that her voice becomes the only truth you can hear. And when you have no one left to compare her to, she becomes the standard by which all things are measured. Her version of events becomes the only version. Her needs become the only needs that exist. And in that complete isolation, when she is your only reference point for reality, she moves to the final stage of acquisition. She makes you responsible for her emotional survival. The fifth mechanism is obligation manufacturing through weaponized vulnerability. She shares her trauma far too early. Stories of abuse, betrayal, abandonment that would take years of trust to earn. But she gives them to you freely, urgently, tearfully in the first weeks. You barely know her last name. You don't know her friends or her family or what she does on ordinary days. And yet she has already handed you her entire history of suffering, complete with tears and trembling voice. Maybe it's a story about a father who never showed up, or an ex who cheated, or a boss who humiliated her. The specific wound doesn't matter. What matters is the timing and the intensity. She cries. Her voice trembles. She says she's never told anyone this. And in that moment, you feel like you've been chosen for something sacred. You feel like the only man strong enough to handle her truth. But what you don't realize is that this confession is not vulnerability. It's a transaction. By trusting you with her pain, she's created an obligation. Now you cannot leave without being the man who abandoned her in her brokenness. Now you cannot question her without being the man who hurt her when she was already hurting. She's not sharing her pain. She's installing a kill switch in your conscience. And that kill switch activates the moment you try to leave. The guilt becomes unbearable, and you stay. This is the savior trap. She becomes the victim, and you become the rescuer. The dynamic is locked into place the moment you accept the role. Her moods become your responsibility. Her stability becomes your full-time job. She doesn't need to control you directly anymore. She's installed herself as someone who cannot be disappointed without catastrophic consequence. And you volunteered for the position the moment you wiped her tears and promised you'd never hurt her the way the others did. The sixth mechanism is frame testing through incremental violation. Small transgressions at first, so small you almost don't notice. She reads your messages because she was curious and couldn't help herself. She shows up at your workplace unannounced because she missed you and wanted to surprise you. She makes plans that override yours because she forgot you mentioned that thing with your friends. But it's fine, isn't it? These are not accidents. These are not innocent lapses. They are probes sent to map your perimeter. She is testing whether your boundaries are walls or suggestions. She pushes against them disguised as playfulness, as overwhelming love, as innocent mistake, and she watches your reaction with the focus of a scientist recording data. If you hold firm, if you maintain the boundary. She plays the victim. You're cold, you're distant, you don't care about her. Maybe you're just like all the other men who let her down. If you yield, if you let the violation pass to keep the peace. She takes careful note and expands the territory next time. This is the ratchet effect in action. Each boundary you surrender is never returned. The line only moves in one direction. One small yield becomes two. Two becomes pattern. Pattern becomes expectation. Here's what happens next. You hold a boundary once. You say no to something small, and she responds with hurt, not anger, hurt. I thought you cared about me. Or silence, cold silence that lasts hours. And because you've been conditioned to believe that her emotional state is your responsibility, you crack, you apologize, you explain, you yield, and she learns. This boundary is permeable if she applies the right pressure. The man who caves is mapped for systematic exploitation. The man who stands is simply targeted for larger, more sophisticated tests. And the tests never stop. They escalate in direct proportion to your willingness to absorb them. Before you realize what's happened, you're living by rules you never agreed to, apologizing for rights you once considered fundamental, explaining yourself for choices that require no explanation. The seventh mechanism is social entrapment through public performance. Watch her social media behavior. The excessive posting, the constant updates, the public declarations of love to an audience that has nothing to do with your actual relationship. She tags you in everything. She announces milestones you haven't discussed privately. She broadcasts an image of the relationship that often feels more real and more alive online than it does when you're actually together in the same room. You are not a partner in this performance. You are a prop. She uses you to validate her worth to her audience, to prove she is desirable, committed, successfully chosen by a quality man. But there's a deeper motive beneath the vanity. By making the relationship aggressively public, she locks you in with chains of social expectation. Leaving now means public embarrassment. It means questions from everyone who watched the show. It means the humiliation of undoing what she's broadcast to hundreds of people who saw you as the perfect couple. She uses visibility as a cage with invisible bars. The warm captions, the adoring posts, the couple photos with the perfect lighting. They create an image you feel obligated to maintain even as the private reality grows cold and mechanical. You notice something strange. The captions are always about you, my rock. The man who gets me, finally found my person. But when you're alone together, she's on her phone, distant, distracted. The warmth of the public declaration doesn't translate to private presence. And that discrepancy between the public performance and the private reality becomes a weight you carry alone. You can't complain about her being distant because she's just posted a photo of you with a caption about how much she adores you. You can't question her commitment because she's broadcast your relationship to hundreds of people. The public performance has become your cage, and she knows it. She harvests the validation. You inherit the pressure to maintain the image, and the silence about the discrepancy between the woman she performs online and the woman you experience alone grows heavier every day. The eighth mechanism is addiction engineering through intermittent reinforcement. And then, without warning, she switches. The intense affection stops without explanation. The text that flooded your phone every hour now trickled to nothing. The warmth that surrounded you turns to ice. She seems distant, distracted, interested in things she won't explain, looking at her phone and smiling at messages she won't share. You don't know what happened, so you replay every interaction obsessively, searching for the mistake you must have made. But there was no mistake. There was a strategy, and the strategy was to activate your panic. This is intermittent reinforcement, the most addictive form of psychological conditioning ever studied by science. More addictive than any substance because the unpredictability creates desperate hope. By withdrawing randomly, without reason, without warning, she activates your chase instinct at primal levels you cannot consciously override. You work harder to regain what you once had. You text more, you plan more elaborate dates, you sacrifice more. You abandon more of yourself trying desperately to get back to the high she gave you in the beginning. The frame has flipped completely. You went from being the prize she pursued to being the pursuer she barely acknowledges. She controls the supply now. She gives you crumbs of the initial love bombing just often enough to keep you hooked, enough to trigger the memory of how good it was, never enough to satisfy the hunger. You become an addict seeking a fix that arrives on her schedule, never yours. You tolerate what you once would have rejected because withdrawal feels worse than staying. This is not love in any form you would recognize if you could see clearly. This is chemical dependency manufactured through strategic emotional cruelty. And like all addicts, you're chasing a high that will never return because that high was never real. It was an investment, a hook, bait calibrated to lodge deep enough that escape would feel like amputation. The first weeks were the dose that got you addicted. Everything after is withdrawal management. She gives you just enough, a warm text, a moment of the old affection, a reminder of how good it was to keep you from leaving, but never enough to satisfy the hunger. You're not pursuing a woman anymore. You're pursuing a memory of a woman who never existed. And she knows this. She counts on this. Because a man chasing a ghost will do anything to make it real again. The ninth mechanism is debt collection through manufactured guilt. She reveals the ledger she has been keeping since the first moment you met her. The love she gave was never a gift. It was a loan with compound interest, and she expects repayment and compliance. When you resist, when you try to establish any boundary, when you express any need of your own, she reaches immediately for the accounting. After everything I did for you. These words are not reminders of shared affection. They are weapons designed to silence you before you finish speaking. Every gift now has a price tag attached. Every sacrifice she made now demands repayment with interest. You owe her, not because you actually took anything, but because she manufactured a transaction you never agreed to sign. It starts small. After everything I've done for you, you could at least, and the sentence completes with whatever she wants. Your time, your obedience, your silence about things that bother you, your acceptance of behavior you once would have rejected. And because you remember the early days, because you remember how good it felt, because you've been conditioned to believe that her happiness is your responsibility, you pay, you always pay. But the debt never decreases, it only compounds. The more you pay, the more she claims you owe, because the ledger was never about fairness. It was about control, and control, once established, requires constant reinforcement. So she keeps the books open, she keeps reminding you of what she's given, she keeps the guilt alive, and you keep paying interest on a debt you never actually incurred. This is the guilt mechanic operating at full power. The repayment she demands is everything you are. Your obedience, your time, your isolation from everyone else who might offer perspective, your frame surrendered permanently to her control. You are not in a relationship. You are in a servitude contract you signed with dopamine while you were too intoxicated by the attention to read any of the fine print. She never loved you. She acquired you. And everything that felt like romance was negotiation for ownership. Recognizing the transaction is the only way to void the contract. The intensity was never about you, your qualities, your worth, your soul. It was about her need for supply and your willingness to provide it. You do not owe her for manipulation disguised as affection. You do not owe her for isolation framed as passion. You do not owe her for dependency manufactured through strategic withdrawal. Here's what you must understand clearly. The debt she claims you owe was invented. The contract she says you signed was written in invisible ink on paper you never saw. The love she gave was never love. It was bait, carefully calibrated to hook you deep enough that escape would feel like amputation. But it was always bait. And bait is not a gift. Bait is a transaction in which the fish pays with its life. So stop paying interest on loans you never took. Cut the supply, your attention, your compliance, your emotional labor, your presence. Walk away without explanation, and then watch. Watch how quickly the love transforms into rage. She will not weep for lost connection, she will rage at lost leverage. That transformation from devoted partner to venomous accuser in a single breath tells you everything you needed to know from the beginning. The mask falls the moment the manipulation fails. But here's what matters now. She cannot collect from a man who has left the table. She cannot manipulate a frame that no longer exists in her presence. Your silence becomes impenetrable. Your absence becomes your answer. The one who walks away without seeking her approval becomes the one thing she cannot reach. Not because you punished her, not because you won some game, but because you finally became the silence she could never penetrate. The man who needs no explanation, the man who offers no closure, the man who simply vanishes from her reality like smoke dissolving into air. And here's what breaks her. Not your anger, not your accusations, not your explanation of why she's wrong. Those are all things she can work with. She can defend against anger. She can debate accusations. She can respond to explanations. But silence? Silence has no handle. Silence cannot be argued with. Silence cannot be seduced. Silence simply is. And a woman who has built her entire strategy on being able to move men through emotion, manipulation, and performance, she cannot survive in the presence of a man who has become immovable. So she will try everything to pull you back, but you are no longer there to be pulled. And in that silence, you are no longer hers. You are no longer the debtor, the rescuer, the supply, the prop, the contract holder. You are simply gone, unbothered, unreachable, free. That is the only victory. Not rage, not explanation, not revenge. Just the silence of a man who finally saw the system clearly and chose to exist outside it entirely. She cannot reach what she cannot see. And you are no longer visible.